The tension in the air was almost palpable the day Sarah told me she'd be flying to Tokyo for an important work project. As an advertising executive, she'd always had a flair for blending professionalism with charm, and she knew how to sell any narrative. But this time, something felt off. "It's a huge opportunity," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "The client is very demanding, and I'll need to be there for at least a week." I nodded, suppressing a pang of unease. Her travel for work wasn't unusual. In fact, it was one of the reasons I admired her ambition. But the details of this trip didn't quite add up. Why Tokyo? Why now? Still, I pushed the doubts aside, telling myself I was overthinking it. After all, we'd been married for 7 years, and I trusted her implicitly. The evening before her departure, Sarah seemed unusually upbeat, bustling around the house with an energy that felt rehearsed. She packed her suitcase meticulously, folding each item with care. I couldn't help but notice the delicate lace lingerie she tucked into her bag, the same set I'd bought her on our anniversary. It struck me as odd. Since when did she bring lingerie on work trips? "Just in case I get a moment to relax in the hotel," she explained when she caught me looking. Her tone was light, but her cheeks flushed slightly. I forced a smile. "You deserve some downtime. Just don't work too hard, okay?" "Of course, honey." She leaned in to kiss me, her lips lingering just long enough to make me question my doubts. "I'll call you as soon as I land." The next morning, I drove her to the airport. She chattered about the client, a high-profile tech company looking to launch an international campaign. I listened dutifully, masking my growing unease. As she walked through the security checkpoint, she turned and waved, her smile bright and seemingly genuine. "See you soon," she called. I waved back, trying to shake the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't until 2 days into her trip that my suspicions deepened. Sarah had promised to call every evening, but the calls were brief and sporadic. Her voice was cheerful but distant, like she was rushing through a script. When I asked about her meetings, she kept her answers vague, avoiding specifics. That's when I decided to check her credit card statement. I wasn't trying to snoop, I just wanted to reassure myself. What I found only fueled my doubts. The charges weren't from Tokyo. Instead, they were from hotels and restaurants in Hawaii. Hawaii. My blood ran cold. There was no logical explanation for Sarah to be in Hawaii when she was supposed to be halfway across the globe. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Could it be a mistake? A simple mix-up? But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Sarah had lied to me. I spent the next day in a haze, replaying our last conversations and trying to piece together the truth. Finally, I decided to call her, confronting the issue head-on. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "How's Tokyo?" There was a pause, a fraction of a second too long. "It's great," she replied, her tone bright but forced. "The city's incredible, and the meetings are going well." I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "That's funny," I said evenly. "Because your credit card statements say you're in Hawaii." Silence. For a moment I thought she might deny it, spin another lie to cover her tracks. But instead, she laughed, soft, almost nervous. "I guess the cat's out of the bag," she said finally. "I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't want you to find out this way." "Find out what, Sarah?" My voice was low, trembling with restrained fury. "I'll explain everything when I get back," she said, her tone pleading now. "Please, just give me time." But I didn't want to wait. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The moment Sarah hung up, I stared at my phone, the silence in our home more deafening than any shouting match we'd ever had. My mind reeled with the implications of her confession, or lack thereof. What the hell was she doing in Hawaii? Why had she lied? And who was she with? Sleep was impossible that night. I paced the living room, replaying every moment from the past few weeks, searching for signs I might have missed. Her newfound energy, the extra effort she put into her appearance, the late-night texts that always seemed to make her smile. It all pointed to something I'd refused to see. My wife was hiding something big. By morning, I'd made a decision. If Sarah wouldn't give me answers, I'd find them myself. The first step was accessing our shared phone records. I logged into the account, scrolling through the call logs with a sinking feeling. There it was, a number she'd called almost daily over the past 2 months. It wasn't anyone I recognized. A quick search of the area code confirmed my worst fears. It was a Hawaiian number. I stared at the screen, my hand trembling with rage. My wife was supposed to be on a business trip halfway across the world, but here she was, spending hours on the phone with someone in paradise. Someone I suspected wasn't just a colleague. I called the number. It rang twice before a man answered, his voice smooth and confident. "Hello?" For a moment I couldn't speak. The sound of his voice made my stomach turn. This was the man. I was sure of it. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice tight with barely restrained anger. There was a pause, and then the man chuckled, a low, condescending sound that made my blood boil. "I think you've got the wrong number," he said before hanging up. Wrong number, my ass. By the end of the day, I'd hired a private investigator. His name was Ethan, a grizzled man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He'd been in the business for decades, and he didn't mince words when I told him what I suspected. "Cheaters always leave a trail," he said, jotting down details about Sarah's trip. "If she's in Hawaii with someone, I'll find out." For the next few days, Ethan kept me updated with cryptic texts. Sarah was staying at a luxury resort in Maui, far removed from the business hustle she'd described. Photos began trickling in, grainy images of her laughing by the pool, sipping cocktails, her face aglow with the kind of joy I hadn't seen in years. But it was the man in the photos that made my chest tighten with rage. He was older, tall and well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from wielding power. Ethan confirmed my suspicion. "It's her boss," he said. "David Pierce, CEO of her company. Looks like they've been inseparable since she got there." I spent hours staring at the photos, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and heartbreak. There she was, my wife of 7 years, in the arms of another man. All the late nights, the business trips, the excuses, they all made sense now. She hadn't been working hard for us. She'd been working hard to hide her affair. When Sarah called that evening, her voice was as sweet as honey, but I wasn't in the mood to play along. "How's Hawaii?" I asked, my tone cold. Her silence was deafening. "Mark, don't bother lying," I snapped. "I know everything." "Your boss? Really, Sarah?" There was a long pause before she spoke, her voice trembling. "Mark, I didn't mean for this to happen." "Spare me the excuses," I said. "You flew halfway across the world to cheat on me. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. I don't know. Things have been so hard between us, and David, he made me feel alive again." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "And I didn't?" I spat. "Is that why you've been sneaking around, lying to my face? Please, Mark, let's talk about this when I get home," she pleaded. "I'll explain everything." But I was done waiting. "Don't bother," I said, my voice cold. "You've already said enough." After hanging up, I sat in the dark, anger simmering just beneath the surface. If Sarah thought she could humiliate me like this and walk away unscathed, she was dead wrong. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more vengeful than the last. And then, an idea struck me, a way to even the score in a way she'd never see coming. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Hello?" came the familiar voice on the other end. "Lisa, it's Mark," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "I need a favor." Lisa, Sarah's best friend, had always been a bit of a flirt. We'd shared a few moments of harmless banter over the years, and I knew she had a soft spot for me. If Sarah could betray me with her boss, then I had every reason to level the playing field. Lisa answered the door in a robe, her auburn hair still damp from a shower. "Mark? What are you doing here?" she asked, clearly surprised but not displeased to see me. I need to talk, I said, stepping into her apartment. It's about Sarah. Her brows furrowed as she tightened the belt on her robe. Sarah? Is something wrong? I gave her a humorless laugh. You could say that. She's been lying to me for months. She told me she was in Tokyo for work, but she's in Hawaii, on a romantic getaway with her boss. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth, her expression a mix of shock and anger. What? Mark, are you sure? I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos the private investigator had sent me. Lisa stared at them, her face twisting with disgust. I can't believe her, she said finally. How could she do this to you? It's not just me, I said bitterly. She's lying to everyone, her colleagues, her friends, even you. I don't think I can let this go, Lisa. I need someone to help me see this through. Her eyes softened, and she placed a hand on my arm. Mark, I'm so sorry. You don't deserve this. I hesitated, my resolve faltering for a moment. Lisa was Sarah's best friend, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes, the way her fingers lingered on my skin. I wasn't sure if this was revenge or something else entirely, but in that moment, I didn't care. The next few days passed in a blur of anger and calculation. I kept my distance from Sarah, ignoring her calls and texts. Each time her name popped up on my phone, a fresh wave of betrayal crashed over me. Lisa, on the other hand, was a constant presence. She'd become my sounding board, listening to my rants and offering advice. But our connection was evolving into something more. The lines blurred the night I showed up at her apartment with a bottle of wine. To Sarah's lies, I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. Lisa clinked hers against mine, her smile tinged with sadness. And to starting over. One glass turned into 3, and by the time the bottle was empty, the distance between us had disappeared. Her lips found mine in a heated kiss, and I didn't stop her. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about the consequences or the morality of what we were doing. I was thinking about how satisfying it felt to reclaim some sense of control over my life. When Sarah finally came home, I was waiting for her in the living room, the photos from Hawaii spread across the coffee table. She froze in the doorway, her suitcase still in hand, her face paling as she took in the evidence of her betrayal. Mark, she began, her voice trembling. I can explain. I gestured to the couch. By all means, explain. I'd love to hear how a work trip to Tokyo turned into a romantic vacation with your boss. She set her suitcase down, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, sitting down across from me. David and I, we just connected. It started innocently, but... Save it, I snapped. I've seen the photos. I've heard the excuses. And I'm done. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Mark, please. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but I love you. Love? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call sneaking off to paradise with your boss while feeding me lies about Tokyo? You've destroyed any love I had left for you. She sobbed openly now, but I felt no sympathy. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd torn apart our life together without a second thought. Then she said something that stopped me cold. Mark, I know I messed up, but I'm not the only one, am I? Lisa told me everything. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Sarah's tear-streaked face twisted into something venomous, her voice rising with hysteria. You think I didn't notice how close you two have gotten while I was away? She told me, Mark. She told me you slept with her. She what? I said, my heart sinking. She called me last night. Sarah spat. Said she felt guilty for what happened. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to hear that from her? I clenched my fists, my mind racing. I hadn't expected Lisa to confess, let alone so quickly. I did it because of you, Sarah, I shot back. Because you were off living some fantasy while I was here trying to hold everything together. Oh, don't you dare pin this on me, she screamed. You had a choice, Mark. You could have taken the high road, but instead you ran to my best friend. At least she wasn't lying to me, I shouted, the room echoing with the sound of our voices. We stood there, glaring at each other, the wreckage of our marriage laid bare between us. There was no going back from this. We both knew it. Sarah moved out the next day, taking her suitcase and what little dignity she had left. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and regret. This wasn't how I'd envisioned our life together ending, but maybe it was inevitable. Lisa, too, distanced herself. She apologized for her role in everything, but the damage was done. I didn't have the energy to fight for whatever fragile connection we built. In the weeks that followed, I found myself alone in the house, the silence a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Sarah filed for divorce, and I didn't contest it. We divided our assets, our memories, our lives, and went our separate ways. But there was no victory in any of it, only ashes where love used to be. The house felt cavernous without Sarah. The echo of her laughter, the scent of her perfume, even the sight of her favorite coffee mug, it all haunted me. At first, I thought the emptiness might be liberating, a chance to reclaim my life. Instead, it was suffocating. I spent the first few days in a daze, going through the motions. Work was my only anchor. I threw myself into it, logging long hours to avoid coming home to the quiet. But no amount of spreadsheets or client meetings could distract me from the chaos swirling in my mind. One evening, as I sat on the couch staring blankly at the TV, my phone buzzed. It was Lisa. "Can we talk?" her text read. I hesitated, torn between anger and curiosity. After a long moment, I typed back, "Fine. Come over." She arrived within the hour, her face pale and drawn. Gone was the confident, flirtatious woman who'd been my refuge during the darkest days of my marriage. In her place was someone who looked just as broken as I felt. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she said the moment I opened the door. "I never should have called Sarah. I didn't mean to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice flat. Lisa sighed, wringing her hands. "Guilt, I guess. I couldn't stand the thought of you two fighting because of me." I let out a bitter laugh. "We were already fighting. You just gave her more ammunition." "I know," she said softly, tears welling in her eyes. "I ruined everything, didn't I?" For a moment I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault. But the truth was, we'd both made choices that had led us here. "I think it's best if we take some space," I said finally. "I need time to figure things out." Lisa nodded, her shoulders sagging with defeat. "I understand. I hope someday you can forgive me." As she walked away, I felt a pang of regret. But I knew it was the right decision. Lisa was too closely tied to the wreckage of my marriage. If I was going to move forward, I needed to let her go. The divorce process was swift and brutal. Sarah and I agreed to sell the house, splitting the proceeds. The memories tied to that place were too painful for either of us to hold on to. Packing up our life together was surreal. Each box felt like a tiny funeral, a reminder of what we built and lost. There was a time when I thought Sarah and I were unshakable, that our love could withstand anything. Now, I wasn't even sure I'd ever known her. During the move, I found a box of photos from our early years, pictures of vacations, holidays, and quiet moments at home. In one, we were laughing on the beach, her head resting on my shoulder. We looked so happy, so in love. It was almost unbearable to see. I tucked the photos away in a drawer, unsure if I'd ever be able to look at them again. Through mutual friends, I heard bits and pieces about Sarah's life after the divorce. She moved in with David, though their relationship didn't seem to last long. Apparently, his wife had filed for divorce, and the scandal had tanked his reputation at work. "Guess she didn't get her fairy tale ending," one friend remarked. But their schadenfreude didn't bring me any satisfaction. Sarah's downfall didn't erase the pain she'd caused me, nor did it make my own mistakes any easier to bear. Months later, I ran into Sarah at a coffee shop. She looked different, thinner, more tired. The vibrant, confident woman I'd married seemed to have faded. "Mark," she said, her voice filled with surprise. "Hi. Sarah. I nodded, my tone neutral. How've you been? She hesitated, as if debating whether to give the polite answer or the honest one. I'm managing, she said finally. You? Same. An awkward silence stretched between us. For a moment, I thought about confronting her, demanding to know if she regretted what she'd done. But what was the point? The damage was already done. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. I looked at her, searching for sincerity. And for the first time, I saw it. She wasn't just sorry for being caught. She was sorry for the pain she'd caused. I'm sorry too, I said, surprising myself. For my part in all of it. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I hope you find happiness, Mark. You too. As I watched her walk away, I felt a strange sense of closure. The anger and bitterness that had consumed me for so long began to dissipate, leaving behind a fragile sense of peace. Life didn't magically get better after the divorce, but it did get quieter. I moved into a smaller place, focused on rebuilding my life one day at a time. I went to therapy, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again, though my trust in people remained fragile. There were days when the loneliness was overwhelming, when the weight of everything I'd lost felt unbearable. But there were also moments of hope, small glimpses of the life I could build for myself. The scars from my marriage would never fully heal, but they didn't define me. Slowly, I was learning to let go, to forgive, not just Sarah, but myself. The months after the divorce felt like trudging through a swamp, slow, heavy, and exhausting. But life, stubborn as ever, kept moving. I moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. There was no trace of Sarah here, no ghosts lingering in the walls. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and late nights. At first, it was a distraction, a way to avoid the silence of my new life. But over time, it became more than that. I started to feel pride in my accomplishments again, a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. Despite my efforts to move on, reminders of Sarah cropped up in unexpected places. I ran into mutual friends at the grocery store, their awkward smiles and half-hearted questions about how I was holding up, dredging up memories I'd rather forget. Worse were the memories that came unbidden, like the time I opened a storage box and found an old love letter she'd written me. Her handwriting was neat, her words full of passion and promises we'd both broken. I shoved the letter back in the box and pushed it to the back of the closet, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't name. I hadn't spoken to Lisa since our falling out. She'd respected my request for space, but every so often, I caught myself wondering about her. Was she angry with me? Hurt? Or had she simply moved on? One evening, as I sat on my balcony nursing a beer, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lisa. Hey, I know it's been a while. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave the past buried. But another part, the part that still cared about her, couldn't resist. Sure. When? She showed up the next day, looking nervous but determined. We sat on my couch, the silence between us heavy. I owe you an apology, she said finally, her voice trembling. I betrayed Sarah, and I betrayed you. I've been carrying that guilt for months, and I needed to tell you how sorry I am. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I'm not blameless, Lisa. We both made mistakes. She smiled sadly. I know. But I still care about you, Mark. And I hope we can find a way to move past this. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I considered the possibility. But as I looked into her eyes, I realized the trust we'd once shared was gone. I care about you too, I said carefully. But I don't think we can go back to what we were. There's too much history between us now. Her face fell, but she nodded. I understand. I just needed to say my piece. When she left, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I was truly letting go of the past. Time passed, and the ache of the divorce began to fade. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends and even trying my hand at dating. It wasn't easy. Every woman I met seemed to remind me of Sarah in some way, and the thought of letting someone in again was terrifying. But then I met Emma. She was a freelance graphic designer I hired for a project at work. She was smart, funny, and unflinchingly honest. We hit it off immediately, bonding over a shared love of classic movies and late-night coffee runs. Emma wasn't like Sarah, or Lisa, for that matter. She was grounded, with a quiet confidence that put me at ease. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe around someone. One night, a few months into dating, Emma invited me to her place for dinner. It was simple, just pasta and a bottle of wine, but it felt like the most intimate thing I'd experienced in years. As we sat on her couch afterward, laughing at some ridiculous comedy she'd picked out, she turned to me and said, "You're not like most guys I've dated. Is that a good thing?" I asked, grinning. She nodded, her expression serious. "It is. You're kind, Mark. And I think you've been hurt more than you let on." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to deny it, to brush it off with a joke, but something about her sincerity made me stop. "I've been through some things," I admitted. "But I'm trying to move forward." She reached for my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "You're doing better than you think." Just when I thought I'd found stability, Sarah reappeared in my life. She called one evening, her voice shaky. "Mark, can we talk? I need to see you." Every instinct told me to hang up, to protect the life I was building with Emma. But curiosity, and maybe a lingering sense of unfinished business, won out. We met at a park, her face pale and drawn. "I made a mistake," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Leaving you, being with David, it was all a mistake. I want to fix things." Her words were like a knife twisting in my gut. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to list every way she destroyed our life together. But another part, the part that still remembered the good times, felt a flicker of pity. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said finally. "But there's no going back. Too much has happened." She sobbed harder, but I held firm. Letting her back in would only reopen old wounds. That night, I told Emma everything. She listened without judgment, her presence a calming balm on my frayed nerves. "I'm proud of you," she said when I finished, "for standing your ground." As I held her close, I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't defined by my past. I was moving forward, one step at a time. And no matter what came next, I knew I'd be okay. Life with Emma felt like a second chance I wasn't sure I deserved. She was patient with me, never pushing too hard, always giving me space to heal. For a while, I thought the storm had passed, that I could finally put Sarah behind me and start fresh. But the past has a way of resurfacing, clawing its way back to the surface when you least expect it. It arrived on a Wednesday, a plain white envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. The message was short, typed in an unassuming font. "Do you really think you can escape the truth? Ask Emma what she's hiding." My stomach twisted as I read the words again. It felt like a sick joke, but the gnawing doubt planted itself in my mind. I stared at the letter for hours, trying to make sense of it. Who would send something like this? And why? Emma noticed my distraction that evening. "Mark, are you okay?" she asked as we ate dinner. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just a rough day at work." She didn't press further, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I couldn't let it go. The letter was a spark, igniting a paranoia I thought I'd buried. The next day, I left work early and did something I never thought I'd do. I hired another private investigator. "Look into Emma," I told him, my voice heavy with guilt. "I need to know if she's keeping something from me." He nodded, scribbling notes on a pad. "I'll be discreet." For the next week, I lived in a state of constant anxiety. Every time Emma smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodnight, I wondered if it was all a lie. When the investigator finally called, his voice was calm, almost bored. I've got some things you might want to see. I met the PI in a dingy coffee shop on the outskirts of town. He slid a folder across the table, his expression unreadable. Inside were photos and documents, Emma meeting a man at a hotel, text logs detailing conversations with someone named Kyle. The photos were damning, but it was the messages that hit the hardest. I can't keep lying to him. One read. Just a little longer. He doesn't have to know, Kyle replied. My hands shook as I closed the folder. Who is he? I asked, my voice hoarse. Ex-boyfriend, the PI said. Looks like they've been seeing each other on and off since before she met you. I stared at the folder, my chest tight. How could I have been so blind? That night, I waited for Emma to come home, the folder sitting on the coffee table like a ticking bomb. She walked in, her face lighting up when she saw me. Hey, she said, leaning in to kiss me. You're home early. I pulled away, my expression cold. We need to talk. Her smile faltered. What's wrong? I pointed to the folder. Care to explain this? Her face went pale as she opened it, her hands trembling. For a moment she said nothing, her eyes scanning the photos and texts. Mark, I can explain. Don't, I interrupted, my voice shaking with anger. Don't you dare try to spin this. Just tell me the truth. Tears filled her eyes as she sank onto the couch. It's not what you think. Kyle, he's my ex. He reached out a while ago, and I didn't know how to tell you. So you lied instead? I snapped. You snuck around behind my back, just like Sarah did. Her tears spilled over, but I felt no sympathy. I wasn't cheating, Mark. I swear. I met him a few times to get closure, that's all. Closure? I laughed bitterly. Do you think I'm stupid? Those texts don't sound like closure to me. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I was scared, she said. Scared you wouldn't understand, scared you'd leave me. You should have been honest, I said coldly. But you didn't, and now I can't trust you. Emma moved out a week later. She begged me to reconsider, but my mind was made up. The wounds Sarah had left were still raw, and Emma's betrayal had only deepened them. I spent the following days in a fog, angry at her, at Sarah, at myself. The apartment felt empty again, the silence oppressive. I started drinking more, using alcohol to numb the pain. My work suffered, and my friends began to drift away, tired of my bitterness. One evening, as I sat nursing a glass of whiskey, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Sarah standing there, her eyes red from crying. Mark, she said, her voice trembling. I heard about Emma. I just wanted to check on you. I stared at her, stunned. Of all people, she was the last person I expected to see. What do you want, Sarah? I asked, my voice tired. She hesitated, then stepped closer. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I hurt you, and I can't change that, but I don't want you to go through this alone. Her words were like a cruel joke, and yet some part of me was drawn to her. Despite everything, she was still the woman I'd loved for so many years. Without thinking, I stepped aside, letting her in. As Sarah sat across from me, the memories of our life together flooded back. For a moment, it felt like old times, two people who understood each other better than anyone else. But beneath the surface, the tension simmered. We were two broken people clinging to the past, unable to move forward. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. Sarah sat on my couch, her presence both familiar and alien. The woman I had loved, the woman who betrayed me, she was here, sipping a glass of wine like nothing had changed. I watched her carefully, unsure why I had let her in. Was it curiosity? Loneliness? Or some twisted desire for closure? You look like hell, she said softly, breaking the silence. I laughed bitterly. Takes one to know one. Her smile faltered. I deserve that. Why are you here, Sarah? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. We've been over this. There's nothing left to say. I know, she said, setting her glass down. I hate what's happened to us. And I hate that you're hurting again. Her concern felt hollow, like a cheap knockoff of the love we used to share. You don't get to play the savior, I snapped. Not after what you did. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. She didn't get to be the victim in this story. I know I messed up, she said, her voice trembling. But I never stopped caring about you, Mark. You have to believe that. The conversation turned, as I suspected it would, to her regrets. She talked about David, the lies, the promises, and how it all unraveled when his wife filed for divorce. It wasn't what I thought it would be, she admitted. He wasn't what I thought he would be. I scoffed. And you figured that out after you destroyed our marriage? She flinched but didn't argue. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I wish we could go back to the way things were. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. You want me to take you back? I asked, my voice incredulous. I want us to try again, she said, her eyes pleading. We were good together once, Mark. Maybe we could be good again. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. After everything she'd done, lying, cheating, abandoning me, she wanted me to forgive her? You think we can just rewind the clock? I asked, my voice low. Pretend none of it happened? I'm not asking you to forget, she said. I'm asking you to let me make it right. Her words stirred something inside me, a dangerous mix of nostalgia and longing. I thought of the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared. For a moment I let myself imagine what it would be like to have her back, to wake up beside her, to laugh with her, to love her again. But then the memories of her betrayal crashed over me like a wave. The lies, the deceit, the image of her with David, it was all too much. I can't, I said finally, my voice breaking. I can't trust you, Sarah. And without trust, there's nothing left. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she whispered. Just as Sarah was getting ready to leave, there was a loud knock at the door. I frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Are you expecting someone? She asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. No, I said, rising to answer it. When I opened the door, my stomach dropped. It was Emma. Her eyes flicked between me and Sarah, her expression a mix of shock and betrayal. What the hell is going on here? She demanded. Emma, it's not what you think, I stammered, though even as I said the words, I knew how hollow they sounded. Not what I think, she said, her voice rising. You're sitting here with your ex-wife, who cheated on you, by the way, after everything we've been through? Emma, please, I began, but she cut me off. No, Mark. You don't get to explain. I thought we were trying to build something real, but clearly, I was wrong. She turned to leave, but I grabbed her arm. Wait, I said, my voice desperate. Don't go. She pulled away, her eyes flashing with anger. I should have known better, she said. You're too stuck in the past to ever move forward. With that, she stormed out, leaving me standing in the doorway, my heart pounding. After Emma left, Sarah stayed, her presence a grim reminder of everything I'd lost. You really screwed that up, she said, her tone laced with irony. I glared at her. Don't you dare lecture me. This is your fault. She shrugged, her expression unreadable. Maybe it is. But you're the one who let her go. Her words cut deeper than I cared to admit. In the days that followed, I was consumed by regret. Emma's words echoed in my mind. You're too stuck in the past to ever move forward. She was right. I'd been so wrapped up in my anger at Sarah, my pain from her betrayal, that I hadn't allowed myself to truly move on. But now, I had nothing, no Sarah, no Emma, no future. For the first time in months, I realized that if I didn't change, I'd end up alone, consumed by the ruins of my past. The days after Emma's departure were some of the loneliest I'd ever experienced. I was stuck in a limbo of my own making, haunted by the ghosts of 2 failed relationships. The silence of my apartment became unbearable, each moment stretching into an eternity as I wrestled with regret and self-loathing. I tried reaching out to Emma, leaving messages that went unanswered. My pride begged me to stop, but my heart wasn't ready to let go. She was the first glimmer of hope I'd had in years, and I'd let her walk away because I couldn't escape my past. And Sarah? She had the audacity to call a few times after that disastrous night. I didn't answer. I couldn't stomach hearing her voice, knowing she was part of the wreckage that had become my life. One morning, I received an envelope in the mail that brought everything rushing back. It was addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately, Sarah's. I nearly tossed it in the trash, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her words scrawled in shaky script. Mark, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago. When we were together, I thought I was happy. I thought I loved you the way a wife is supposed to love her husband. But the truth is, I was selfish. I didn't appreciate what we had because I didn't know how to. David was a mistake, yes, but I realized now that the real mistake was letting my insecurities push me away from you. I broke something between us that can never be fixed, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. But there's something else I need to confess, something I can't carry with me anymore. The letter stopped there, the ink trailing off as if she'd been interrupted. I stared at the page, my heart pounding. What could she possibly need to confess now? I found out soon enough. That evening, as I returned from a run, Sarah was waiting for me in the parking lot of my apartment building. She looked frazzled, her usually composed demeanor replaced by something raw and unsteady. Mark, she said, her voice trembling. We need to talk. I folded my arms, keeping my tone cold. You had your chance to talk, Sarah. I'm done. Please, she begged, tears welling in her eyes. This isn't about us. It's about the past. About David. The mention of his name made my chest tighten with anger. What about him? She hesitated, wringing her hands. There's more to what happened between us than you know. And it's something you deserve to know. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Against my better judgment, I motioned for her to follow me inside. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Start talking, I said, my tone sharp. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she clasped them together. When I started seeing David, it wasn't just an affair. It was a way out. I thought I wanted something more, something you couldn't give me. But, she faltered, looking away. But what? I pressed. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. David wasn't the man I thought he was. He wasn't just unfaithful to his wife. He was manipulative, controlling. He convinced me that leaving you would make my life better, but all he did was use me. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but she wasn't finished. After everything fell apart with him, I found out something that made me question everything. She continued. I went to the doctor for a routine checkup, and they ran some tests. Mark, David wasn't the only person he was sleeping with. And some of the women he was with. I cut her off, my voice sharp. Get to the point, Sarah. She looked me in the eye, tears streaming down her face. I'm sick, Mark. And there's a chance he gave it to me. My heart stopped. Sick how? She hesitated, her voice breaking. HIV. The room spun as her words sank in. HIV. The weight of it crushed the air from my lungs, my mind racing to connect the dots. Are you saying? I started, my voice barely audible. There's a chance I gave it to you, she said, sobbing. I don't know for sure, but you need to get tested, Mark. Please. I stared at her, my emotions a hurricane of rage, fear, and disbelief. How long have you known? A few weeks, she admitted. I was scared to tell you. I didn't know how. You didn't know how? I roared, standing up so fast the chair toppled over. You put my life at risk, and you didn't think I had a right to know? I'm sorry, she sobbed, her face buried in her hands. Get out, I said, my voice icy. Get out of my apartment. I never want to see you again. She hesitated, looking like she might argue, but the look on my face must have told her I wasn't bluffing. Without another word, she fled, leaving me alone with the weight of her confession. The next morning, I went to the clinic. The process was excruciating. The blood draw, the waiting, the gnawing fear that my life was about to change forever. When the nurse finally came in with the results, I held my breath. Negative, she said, her voice calm. Relief flooded me, so overwhelming that I nearly collapsed. But it was short-lived. The damage Sarah had done wasn't just physical. It was emotional, psychological, a scar that would never fully heal. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of closure. Sarah's confession, as horrifying as it was, had finally severed the last threads of connection between us. But the relief was fleeting. The pain of betrayal, the emptiness left behind by Emma's departure, it all lingered, a constant reminder of the price I'd paid for trusting the wrong people. And as I sat in the sterile clinic waiting room, I realized that moving forward wouldn't be about finding someone new or erasing the past. It would be about learning to live with the scars. After receiving the all-clear from the clinic, I felt a flood of relief, but it wasn't the triumphant kind. It was muted, weighted by everything I'd been through. Sarah's confession had left me shaken to my core, and Emma's absence was a constant ache I couldn't ignore. For weeks, I kept to myself, avoiding friends and family. I buried myself in work, letting the routine of deadlines and meetings fill the emptiness inside me. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the nights always brought the memories, the betrayal, the anger, the loss. One Saturday afternoon, as I sat on my couch flipping aimlessly through channels, my phone buzzed. It was from Ethan, the private investigator I'd hired months ago to look into Sarah's Hawaii trip. Checking in? Let me know if you need anything else. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Actually, I could use some advice. He called within minutes. What's going on? He asked, his gruff voice tinged with genuine concern. I told him everything, Sarah's confession, Emma's departure, the lingering sense of betrayal that seemed to follow me everywhere. Sounds like you've been through the ringer, he said. But you're still standing, and that counts for something. I don't feel like I'm standing, I admitted. I feel like I'm barely holding on. Ethan paused, then said, You ever thought about therapy? Might help you make sense of all this. The idea hadn't crossed my mind, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I needed to process everything, to figure out how to move forward without the weight of the past dragging me down. The first therapy session was awkward. I sat across from Dr. Elaine Turner, a kind-eyed woman in her early 50s, and stumbled through my story. So your wife cheated, your girlfriend left, and now you're feeling stuck. She summarized, her voice calm but direct. That about covers it, I said with a weak smile. And what do you want to get out of this? I hesitated. What did I want? To stop feeling angry? To stop thinking about Sarah and Emma? To stop doubting everyone I met? I want to trust again, I said finally. Dr. Turner nodded. Trust is hard to rebuild after betrayal, but it's not impossible. It starts with trusting yourself. Her words stayed with me long after the session ended. Trusting myself, how could I, when I'd failed so completely to see the truth about Sarah? A month into therapy, I ran into Emma at a bookstore. She was browsing the fiction section, her hair tied up in a loose bun, a soft smile on her face as she flipped through a novel. For a moment, I considered walking away, but my feet betrayed me. Emma, I said, my voice hesitant. She looked up, startled. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me, but her expression quickly softened. Mark. Hi. How are you? I asked, feeling stupid for even saying it. I'm okay, she said. How about you? Surviving, I admitted with a faint smile. There was an awkward pause before she spoke again. I heard about Sarah. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Thanks, I said, my throat tightening. It's been a lot. She nodded, then hesitated. I didn't handle things well either. I shouldn't have walked out the way I did. Her words caught me off guard. You had every right to, I said. I was a mess, and I dragged you into it. We stood there in the aisle, surrounded by books, the air between us heavy with unspoken things. Finally, she broke the silence. Do you want to grab a coffee? She asked. Over the next hour, we talked like we hadn't in months. Emma told me about her work, her family, and how she'd spent the past few weeks reflecting on everything that had happened. I miss you, she admitted, her voice soft. But I couldn't stay when it felt like I was competing with your past. I understand, I said. And I'm sorry. You deserve better. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. What about now? Are you still stuck in the past? I thought about Dr. Turner's advice, about trusting myself and letting go of what I couldn't change. No, I said finally. I'm not. Just as it felt like Emma and I might be finding our way back to each other, life threw another curveball. A week after our coffee date, I got a call from Sarah. I know you don't want to hear from me, she said, her voice strained. But it's important. What is it, Sarah? I asked, my patience already wearing thin. It's about David, she said. He reached out to me. He's been asking questions about you, about your business, your personal life. My chest tightened. Why would he care about me? I don't know, she said. But I thought you should know. He's not someone you want digging into your life. The warning left me shaken. David had already caused enough damage, but the idea of him targeting me now felt like a threat I couldn't ignore. I called Ethan that evening, explaining the situation. Sounds like this guy's looking for leverage, he said. We'll make sure he doesn't find any. As we made plans to protect my personal and professional life, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. David was a man used to getting what he wanted, and now, for some reason, I was in his sights. As I sat in my apartment that night, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, it was almost too much to bear. But I wasn't the same man I'd been months ago. I'd learned how to survive, how to rebuild, how to trust myself again. And whatever was coming, I was ready to face it. The days after Sarah's warning were filled with unease. Every text, every email, every unfamiliar face felt like a potential threat. David's name lingered in my mind like a storm cloud, promising chaos. Whatever game he was playing, I knew it wouldn't be harmless. Ethan was thorough. He dug into David's recent activities, and what he found made my blood run cold. Your ex-boss is in financial trouble, Ethan explained over the phone. Looks like he's been moving money through shell corporations to cover losses from a failed investment. And what does that have to do with me? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. Ethan hesitated. Sarah might have mentioned your business in passing. If David thinks he can extort money out of you, he will. That evening, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "We need to talk." Against my better judgment, I opened it. Mark, you and I have unfinished business. You have something I need, and I'm willing to make it worth your while. Let's meet and settle this like men. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name to know who'd sent it. I forwarded the email to Ethan, who called me immediately. This is a trap, he said. Don't engage with him. But I couldn't shake the feeling that ignoring David would only escalate things. Against Ethan's advice, I agreed to meet David at a bar downtown. It was a public place, with enough witnesses to keep things from getting out of hand, or so I thought. David arrived 15 minutes late, his suit crisp and his confidence oozing from every pore. He smiled as he slid into the booth across from me, as if we were old friends catching up. Mark, he said, his voice smooth. Thanks for meeting me. Let's cut the crap, I said, my tone cold. What do you want? He chuckled, swirling the whiskey he'd ordered. Straight to the point. I like that. Here's the thing, I've hit a bit of a rough patch financially, and I could use a little help. You're kidding, right? I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. You think I'm going to bail you out after everything you've done? His smile faded, his eyes hardening. I know about your accounts, Mark. The sale of your house, your business investments. You've got enough to help a guy out. I leaned forward, my voice low and firm. I don't owe you a damn thing. David's smirk returned. Maybe not, but I wonder how your new girlfriend would feel if she found out about your little indiscretion with Lisa. Or how your colleagues would react if certain photos of you and Sarah resurfaced. The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. I didn't take the bait. You're desperate, I said, keeping my voice steady. And desperation makes people sloppy. You can try to ruin me, but I've got nothing to hide. Can you say the same? David's confidence faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. You're playing a dangerous game, Mark. No, David, I said, standing up. You are. I walked out of the bar, my heart pounding. I didn't know if I'd won or just delayed the inevitable, but I wasn't about to let him drag me back into the darkness. The next morning, Ethan called with good news. We've got him, he said. He'd uncovered records of David's financial misdeeds, including a fraudulent loan tied to a property deal. With the evidence in hand, Ethan reached out to David's former business partners and forwarded the documents. Within days, the fallout began. David's name was splashed across headlines, his shady dealings exposed for the world to see. His remaining assets were frozen, and lawsuits started piling up. Sarah called me a week later. I heard about David, she said, her voice shaky. Good riddance, I replied. She sighed. I'm sorry for dragging you into all of this, Mark. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. I know you do, I said. But we're done, Sarah. We've been done for a long time. There was a long pause before she said, I hope you find happiness. I hope you do too, I replied, meaning it more than I expected to. I told Emma everything, about David, the threats, even the meeting at the bar. To my surprise, she didn't walk away. You're trying, Mark, she said. That's all I ever wanted. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a step forward. We spent the next few months rebuilding what we'd started, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, but it was real. Looking back, I realized the true cost of betrayal wasn't just the pain of the moment. It was the doubt, the fear, the way it made you question everything, including yourself. But I also learned that rebuilding wasn't impossible. It took time, effort, and a willingness to face the truth, no matter how ugly. And as Emma and I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time, the past felt like just that, the past.